Good morning, I'm Angie Austin with Oil and Gas 360. We're here at the 2015 Enercom Oil and Gas Conference in Denver, and we're joined this morning with Hal Chappelle. He is president and CEO of Alta Mesa Holdings, and this is your third year at the conference, I understand?
That's correct.
And enjoying it?
We are. This is a really important gathering for our industry. People get to come together, they share best practices and current activities. You're able to, in a pretty informal manner, learn a lot from each other, and then in formal presentations you have the opportunity to tell your story and hear other people's stories. So it's a real good forum for our industry.
Yeah, there's a lot of enthusiasm. I've really been enjoying it myself, and I'm an outsider, and I've really gotten a kick out of it, I have to say. Well, and I find what you do very interesting because it's a little different than some of the other organizations I've interviewed. So let's talk first of all, start, Hal, with the geography of your operation. Alta Mesa's core operations are focused in the Sooner Trend in Oklahoma, Weeks Island Field in South Louisiana, and South Texas Eagle Ford Shale. So you're spread out. Your asset base seems geographically, out there, spread out over some locations. So can you tell me if you consider that an advantage or a disadvantage? And a twofold question, how do you feel about their relative project economics?
Okay, so from the standpoint of the geography, it's not a disadvantage at all. In fact, it's a strength of the company. What we have is an opportunity to have enough, if you will, mass in a given area where we can have a workforce that can be scalable in that particular area so that we can grow our activity and our asset base. And we have enough activity in that given area where that expertise that we grow is very specific to the asset itself. Mm-hmm. From the standpoint of long term, the other thing that it does for us is that there are macro trends that happen in our industry from time to time where, for example, you may have some market dislocations, and so one area may have some disadvantages at a given period of time. When you have a diversified asset base, you're able to weather through those storms. Now, from the standpoint of the assets that we have, the Sooner Trend in Oklahoma, we've actually been developing that acreage for over 23 years. We acquired those, the assets there from major oil companies, Conoco, Texaco, and Exxon back in the early 90s. And we've been stewarding those for several years now, for 20 plus years. And just recently we've been able to take advantage of breakthroughs in technology, horizontal drilling, multi-stage fracturing, and all of that, so that we can develop those and really increase production quite a bit. Those assets are incredibly valuable, and we see a lot of running room there. Weeks Island in Louisiana, it's a different story, but it has some similarities. Weeks Island was originally developed by Exxon and Shell. It's a giant oil field, having produced 500 million barrels in its history, and we're able to take new technology there, directional drilling, three-dimensional seismic with some of the most advanced processing that our industry can do right on a desktop today instead of with a supercomputer in a national lab like they used to have to do, and figure out that place to drill to find that extra 500,000 or 1 million barrels of oil. As a result of that, the economics are very, very strong there, just as they are in Sooner Trend. Finally, in the Eagle Ford play in South Texas, Karnes County, Texas, south of Houston, kind of in between Houston and Corpus Christi. There, we're the non-operator. Murphy Oil and others are the operator, and we have a small working interest, around 15%. It's been a great asset for about 5 years for us, and the economics of that play are very strong. Strong meaning we can invest money for a very strong return, and even in these kind of oil prices.
Interesting. All right, let's talk about production growth. You have over 70,000 acres in the Sooner Trend stack play. That asset is producing more than 11,000 BOE per day, up from about 6,000 BOE per day at the beginning of the year. So can you give us some insights on why we're seeing such strong production growth in that particular area?
Yeah, and I was sort of getting to that earlier. Sooner Trend, that 70,000 net acres actually is spread across maybe 120,000 gross acres. We don't have every tract and every square mile there. Okay. But we have a lot of contiguous acreage that we control. And so what we've been able to do here in just the recent years is figure out that begin to figure out actually the geologic column. There's several hundred feet of oil-soaked rock in the Mississippian age limestone there that we refer to as the Osage and the Merrimack. Above that are other limestones called the Oswego, and then below that there's a shale called the Woodford Shale. Each of those zones has some prospectivity, and what we've been able to do is by drilling 60 wells in the last 2.5 years that we operate and participating with other operators in about 30 more wells, so a total of 90 wells. We've been able to begin to have insights into how to best develop that acreage, and along the way we've been able to profitably increase production. So 2.5 years ago we were producing about 1,000 barrels a day there from our acreage, and today we're up at that 11,000 barrel a day rate ourselves.
Well, I find what you do very interesting, to actually have land that people have walked away from, and now all these years later with the new technology, they're profitable. I think it's genius, personally, coming as an outsider looking in on what you do.
It's a great part of our industry.
Yeah, it really is.
You could call it a food chain, or you could also call it just a natural progression. The large companies go elsewhere to, like the Exxons, overseas to find even larger resources, again, for the good of everybody, so we can develop energy, and we get to apply new technology and a real focus to a smaller area, and it's still very, very important.
All right, let's talk a little bit about, successfully lowering some of your operating expenses. I understand that has gone well. Since the end of 2014, you did successfully lower lease operating expenses in the Weeks Island area to about $14 per barrel from over $20 per barrel. So what drove down the expenses on your Louisiana acreage? And then the twofold part of it, which I can ask again if we forget this part. And can you apply some of that knowledge to your operations in Texas and Oklahoma?
Absolutely. So at the end of 2014, we saw a precipitous drop in oil prices, and that created an intense focus on our part and other people's part on our operating expense. What can we control? We can't control the price of oil. And so what we were able to do is take advantage of investments we had made in increased efficiencies already, increasing our saltwater disposal capacity, decreasing our chemical costs, but then to bring that together with things as simple as re-looking at our work schedule so that we can reduce our overtime, to renegotiating those chemical contracts, to putting in new sand control. Sand control is a major cost sometimes in South Louisiana, so that we could reduce our costs. Actually, our direct costs down to below $7 a barrel in the Weeks Island area. A lot of our costs that we call lease operating expenses are still taxes. All right, so we still pay severance taxes to the state, and we can't control that, and we're very happy that we get to make enough profit that we can pay the taxes.
Right.
So we're very, very proud of that. As to the application in other areas, directly, it's if you will, a way of thinking and an approach to our operations that we've been able to apply in Oklahoma as well.
Excellent. All right, I understand you've got some impressive results in applying the new technology that we briefly did speak about. Alta Mesa has a strong track record of developing and applying new technology and techniques to uncover opportunities overlooked by other industry players. We touched on that. So can you give us an example of how your 90-plus in-house geoscientists, engineers, and managers have added value to the company through these techniques? Because I understand you've got quite a pool of people to draw on for their expertise to help you apply the new technology.
We've got a really good team, very experienced people in this industry that have worked in large companies and worked on some very major projects. They like being in a smaller organization that's fairly flat and where you have a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, if you will. I would say maybe the best example is in the Weeks Island area, where we have this massive structure, if you will, that's set up by a salt dome, and it's geologically complex. Shell, Exxon, and others, back when they were developing these fields in the middle of last century all the way up into the 90s, they didn't have the opportunity to apply three-dimensional seismic. They didn't have drilling capability to go and steer that well to a very precise place under a salt overhang. So we've been able to do that with success probably 54 of the 56 plus or minus wells we've drilled at Weeks Island in the last 5 years have been successful in finding economic accumulations of oil there. And so we've been able to apply technology very, very consistently and successfully at Weeks Island.
That's interesting. All right, let's talk about just some final thoughts. Where do you think the industry will be a year from now?
That's a great question. I think the industry is going to be strong, continue to be strong, and continue to be aggressive in applying itself to finding better ways to cut costs and increase production. That said, this is going to be a challenging 6 months that we're coming into from the standpoint of the finances of our business. There's a lot of stress that's created by a low price environment, and some of that is being felt very acutely by our industry. So a year from now, there may be some companies that are here today that may not be survivors a year from now. That said, I think that we'll continue to press forward just as we have in the gas markets, for example, where we've been able to apply new technology, cut our costs, and still grow production and bring more oil and gas into the industry. So, I look at the next year as one where we're going to have a lot of opportunity. We're going to have a lot of opportunity to be innovative, and we're going to be challenged to continue to find ways to control our costs, cut our costs, increase production, and from Alta Mesa's standpoint, what we want most to be able to do is to define that resource in the Sooner Trend as well as we can, because we think it's got a vast amount of potential, as well as to harvest the value that we can out of the Weeks Island area, those fields, as well as the Eagle Ford.
All right, so I'm curious, and this isn't one of our official questions, but you've been doing this for years. You've seen all this new technology come around. The new technology is obviously part of, a huge part of the success of Alta Mesa Holdings. So, what have you been most impressed with in terms of the advancements? Anything that's just blown your mind, and you're like, "Wow, good thing we came up with this."
Oh, it's hard to even start answering that.
There's so many things.
Well, that's right. The way that we can employ pressure pumping to very, very precisely hydraulically fracture these reservoirs in the subsurface, the way that we've been able to use horizontal drilling and really target an area that is very precisely measured into a small window.
It's almost like you x-ray the land, you know what I mean? And you're like, oh, that's where it's going to be, so we'll get in there.
What's cool is we're drilling these wells in Oklahoma, and we employ a technique that others use too. It's called geosteering. Literally, you have a geologist that's looking real time at a reading from the drill bit area. We call it the bottom hole assembly.
Wow.
On a screen. And we had somebody working in the eastern part of the country in an area that we're no longer interested in, but she happens to still want to live there. She's able to geosteer an Oklahoma well from her home there in West Virginia and create immense value for us, because she keeps that drill bit going exactly along the plane that we need and making those course corrections as we encounter the realities of the earth below us.
Can you imagine, just a side note, 60 years ago, if, the oil men could see what you guys could do now, they'd be like, there's no way.
No, they wouldn't believe it.
They wouldn't believe it. All right, I'm Angie Austin with Oil and Gas 360, and we just conducted our interview with Hal Chappelle. He's the president and CEO of Alta Mesa Holdings. Real pleasure. I enjoyed it, Hal. Thank you.
Same to you. Thank you.